Good Friday morning. Welcome to Begin in the Word. Today we'll be looking at Philippians 4, verses 10 through 13. But I rejoice in the Lord greatly, that now at last your care for me has flourished again, though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Paul mentions back in chapter 4, verse number 4, that he was rejoicing in the Lord, or he compels them, commands them to do so. And he says, I've rejoiced in the Lord. Why? Well, he's rejoiced in the Lord because your care for me has flourished again. Now, how much joy does Paul have in this situation? Paul says, I rejoiced greatly. Their care has flourished again. And this is probably a reference to their gift of support. And this is mentioned back in chapter 1, verse number 5 of their fellowship in the gospel from the first day until now. And that's that sort of situation back there, Philippians chapter 1. And Paul has alluded to this in many places, but this seems to be a reference to some gift in prison, that when you were in prison, you didn't exactly have a system there in place where they were feeding prisoners. You're kind of at the goodwill of people to help you, and in this case, the Philippians did do that. I think there's a good case to be made that part of the purpose of Philippians, that the driving purposes, is as a thank you for that gift. And he addresses other things. You got the letter going anyway, you got the courier going anyway, but as a commendation of Epaphroditus, as well as to say thank you for this. And notice here, as he's talked about their care, he doesn't say their care is small, but it's flourished. It's big. It's overflowing. So he's saying, I rejoice greatly that your care for me has flourished again. So this isn't the first time, but it's flourished again. And he wants to be clear here. This, although, okay, I want to contrast here. It's flourished again, but I want to be sure. You did care. All along you cared, but you lacked opportunity. So what he's saying is that they cared about him all along, but they didn't have any chance to share with him. This gift is a representation of their care, but Paul wants to make sure they understand that he knows they always care about him, but they've been looking for an opportunity to make it happen and to see about it. It's kind of like the care of the Philippians is this tree for Paul, that the Philippians' care for Paul is like a tree, that it's always alive, but at certain seasons it's blooms and it's more beautiful to see. And so this time, this opportunity, this season where they could give him this gift that was to some level extravagant has blossomed on the tree, though the tree's always there and it's always beautiful to behold. Okay, so he wants them to understand something about this, though. He's rejoicing in the Lord greatly because this care has flourished again. They've received this gift that they had previously lacked opportunity to do, but he wants to set the record straight. He says not, okay? Let's understand he wants them to understand the reason he's not rejoicing. He wants them to understand why he is rejoicing, the reason for his joy in their gift, and he doesn't want them to misunderstand that, okay? So he's not speaking in regard to need because he's learned something. He's learned in whatever state he is to be content. Paul wants them to get his mindset and his headspace in this reception of this gift. Paul's joy at the gift isn't like, wow, I was having the worst day ever and I was crumbling and I was an inch away from total despair in prison and the gift came and that helped me out here. That's not what's going on, because he's saying in whatever state he's in to be content. Paul's joy at the gift is not out of discontentment. Paul was content in prison, in the squalor and the filth and the destitution of the arrangement. Somehow he was still content. And we might ask, how in the world could that be? Well, he's going to tell us. He goes on to enumerate the places he's content. Okay, we might say that I know how to be abased, which means to be humbled, and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things, both to be full and then to be hungry. You can sort of see these contrasts here, to abound and to suffer need. You've got kind of these two different deals going back and forth. He's learned both of these things, right? He's learned both and then both. In any situation, this contrast of supply and need, plenty and none. And Paul says he's learned what to do. Now, we might look at the hunger and need and the humiliation, the abasement he's saying, yeah, you got to learn how to deal with that. That's not easy. And we look at people going through that, and it's a hard thing. It's a difficult thing. And contentment certainly doesn't come natural when we're undersupplied. That when we don't have the things that are needful for the body, we want more things. There's this discontentment because we have these urges and these longings. We want more things. And certainly there's a need to learn contentment in that situation. But what I want to point out here is that's not all that Paul says to be content about. And that's a case where in the modern West, we need this word desperately. We need it desperately, because notice what he says here. I have learned both. He's had to learn two things. He's had to learn how to be full. So the learning to be hungry, we get that. It's like, yeah, it's really hard to not have enough. It's really hard to suffer need. But he's had to learn how to be full. He's had to learn how to abound. And this is something we need to see, is that abounding and being full and having plenty is something that has to be learned. It does not come naturally either. And the extravagance and the continual growth of wealth that we've had in the West, and the desire for more and happiness levels not going up any higher, shows us we need to learn that as well. We assume that plenty and abundance are easy. It's natural. It takes no thought. And Paul's saying, no, it doesn't. We might think of Moses' warnings in Deuteronomy about forgetting the Lord when they're full and abundant. Navigating life with plenty is something that must be learned. And as I mentioned, in the last few centuries, if that's shown us anything, the West has not learned this. We might think back to the proverb writer, saying, don't make me so poor, I must steal, but don't make me so rich, I forsake you. There's a tension in both of these. And what is the thing that we need in either situation? The thing in either situation that gets us through is I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That Christ is the strength. He's the force. He's the resilience that allows us to deal with the destitution and the abject poverty that many people in the world deal with. Christ can give them strength. And similarly, Christ can give the person who's struggling with contentment when they've got plenty that same level of strength. We need this to remember this statement here. This is a powerful statement of Christ's provision and Christ's strength and his ability to see to us and his sufficiency. And this powerful passage we're reminded of that's so often quoted, we can't help but remember that, but we've got to see the context. The context of this is not about baseball games or exams or rock climbing or some challenge that we suppose and insist on ourselves. It's about the sufficiency of Christ. In good, in bad, Christ is sufficient. In difficulty, Jesus is enough. Whenever we've got plenty, Jesus is still needed at all times. That on our best days, we still need Christ. And if we forget Christ because we think we've got enough, we've missed it. And if we think that if we forget that we need Christ in our weakness, we've missed it. So he's learned this thing. What's the thing that Jesus learned? Is that Jesus is sufficient and Jesus is Lord. And so as you looked at the things that God has called you to, God has called you to be a specific person in any situation. Jesus is sufficient in that. And there's times we look at the difficulty in front of us, not difficulty that we've projected on ourselves, or we think, yeah, this is what I need, like with events or advancement or our own personal desires. This isn't about personal desires. This is about Jesus' sufficiency in spite of our personal desires. But if there's things that God has called you to and you look and you say it's impossible, trust that through Christ you can do it because Christ is sufficient. Thanks so much for joining us today here at Begin in the Word. It's our prayer that just you begun today in the Word of God, you'll live out today in the Word of God.